Well, good evening and welcome to the Murphy and Murphy Show. I'm Kara Murphy. You are listening to Leading Edge Radio Network. Tonight, we are going to talk about the situation, the tragedies that happened over the weekend with our law enforcement officers. And to talk about this tonight, I have invited my number one go-to top cop, Wayne Thompson from Houston. Hello, Wayne, and welcome.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for being here. You've got a busy schedule these days, so I'm glad you had time to do this very important subject that we're talking about tonight. It's been quite a tragedy, and I know that they're in New York and in Florida, but I know that y'all are a strong brotherhood, so I am sorry for that loss. You know, it's a tough loss.
Yes, indeed, and you're right. We're all family and they're brothers and sisters. So
yeah. Well, I'm sure the feeling was very. There was probably a lot of heavy hearts today when you returned to work. Or well, you're a cop. You probably work on the weekends, but
right.
I'm sure the mood is very solemn.
Yes, of course. Anytime we receive news of a law enforcement death or even any public servant, of course, we're all on the same team. And so anytime we lose a firefighter, EMT, or law enforcement officer, regardless, whether that's in the United States or Canada, we have a very close relationship with them as well. It affects us all. And, of course, we all go into a stage of mourning for our brothers and sisters when they lose their lives. It unfortunately hits close to home, and these recent events are in the news, but it actually happens almost daily. So
right, yeah, absolutely. Well, let's just kind of review what happened. I'm going to go through the events quickly because I think everybody's heard pretty much about it. But there was, of course, in New York City this weekend, 2 police officers were basically executed when a man walked up to their cruiser that they were sitting in and fired 4 shots and hit them both in the head, and they were both fatally shot. One of the officers, and I do want to just take a second to talk about the officers themselves, and I'm not going to even try to say this man's first name. His last name is Liu, and he was a 7-year police veteran. I think he was 32 years old. He had just been married for 2 months, and he was the only son to his parents who had recently, or who were here from China. I read an article where they were outside. Some reporters were outside his home, the parents' home, and they talked to the family physician, and that they said it's just terrible. They haven't eaten all day long. Speaking about his parents, and the mother just kept saying, "My son got lost. My son got lost." And others have described Liu as a very happy man. He was always with his wife. He was quiet, but you could tell they were very much in love. The other officer was Rafael Ramos. He was 40 years old. He had 2 sons. His youngest son was 13 years old. He was a loving husband and father. He lived for his family in his church, and he was just about to become a lay chaplain for the department. He was very excited about that. He participated in church youth activities often, and they said that he always made the kids laugh. His son Jaden, who is 13, posted in his Facebook, "Today I have to say goodbye to my father. He was there for me every day of my life. He was my best friend I could ask for. He was the best friend I could ask for. It's horrible that someone gets shot dead just for being a police officer. Everyone says they hate cops, but they're just people that they have to call for help. I will always love you, and I will never forget you. Rip, Dad." Now that's just heartbreaking.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Many times typically every officer that dies in the line of duty is going to have a family member that is left behind, whether that's a spouse or mother, father, child, fiance. And, of course, that ripples through those folks as well. We never lose just one person. We lose a lot. There's a lot of lives affected And unfortunately, many times children will grow up without their parent. Is similar to the folks that serve in the military. You know, it's a tough hit whether those children are grown or small, and we have a wide variety. You know, the one was married for some time, and the other one was just newly married, and both of them are tragic. And I know you'll probably talk about the deputy in Florida, but you know, he had 4 children, and you know, you can imagine that what they're going to have to deal with in the future. So,
well, yeah, it's awful. I will have to say, and I didn't even put this in my notes, but I just happened to see it. I don't know where I saw it, but that the Steinbrenner organization has already said that they are going to take care of Jaden's education, which George Steinbrenner set up that organization, that foundation, before he died, of course, and it takes care of the children of our fallen heroes. So that was a positive. I mean, that's a positive thing, although it's horrible that how we came about it. This gentleman, I call him gentleman. I don't know what to call him. This Brinsley he also died that day. He was the shooter, and of course he ran to a subway and shot himself on the platform when he realized that he was being followed or being pursued. And we understand that he was a disturbed young man, that he'd had quite a few run-ins with the law.
Right.
And for those 2 specific reasons, or for especially that he was disturbed, there are a lot of people that are trying to separate this from the protests. Also because he tried to kill the wife, or the mother of his child, that morning. And I think she's supposed to, they're expecting her to recover, but she was shot.
Right.
But I have to ask, if this is all about him being mentally unstable, why did he specifically choose 2 police officers? They said that he'd been at a rally the day before, a protest the day before, and he was even taking videos with his phone that he had been involved in these protests. So I think it's very difficult for that point to be made. I think, and I've got a few different people that have tried to make that point. I just got a breaking news release. Hang on just a second. Okay. My card balance. Okay, we'll talk about this one in a minute. Anyway, to get back to that, do you see where I'm going with this?
I do.
We're hearing it already. We hear it from de Blasio and several people that are talking about it. Of course, Sharpton, that was his first thing, and I've got a whole big hunk of what Kareem Abdul-Jabbar wrote in his Time. He wrote a piece in Time that they're really desperately trying to separate these 2 to not make the protest the focus.
Sure.
What do you think about that? What seems reasonable to you?
Well, of course, I think it's hard to go back and judge what was in the mind of a dead man now. As you know, he obviously committed suicide after he did this cowardly act to the 2 officers. So, you know, to go back and try to figure out what he was thinking or not thinking is a little tough to do, but I agree with you that clearly the statements he made to some folks in the crowd, some things that he had posted on some social sites, led me to believe that this was definitely planned and premeditated by a person who was capable of making these decisions and carrying out these threats. Mm-hmm. It does not seem like the act of a mentally ill person who may not be in control of their faculties at the time. So I don't buy that at all. I am sure his family is probably trying to look for a way to put it into something that they can understand. But, you know, here again, he made that decision. He advertised that decision, and he carried it out and essentially told other people what he was fixing to do. That's not a person with a mental illness. That's a person who is set on committing murder. And, you know, in this case especially, and there is no good, you know, I'm not qualifying what happened here, but those two officers were on a anti-terrorism drill. It was essentially a training assignment. You know, this wasn't like they had contacted him in any sort of manner. It was not a traffic stop. It was not a pedestrian stop. They had not engaged him. They were sitting in their car as part of a training exercise, which goes to show that there is no such thing as routine in law enforcement and military. There is no such thing as a safer time than others. You know, you can be in training, you can be off duty, you can be on patrol and detectives, you can be assigned to a special task force, and the reality is it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. People that enter the law enforcement field are at risk the day they take the badge and swear the oath. Right. And that can be even at your house, because now the criminals will follow you home and kill you and your family. So
that's exactly right. Well, let me just repeat what he did tweet or put on Instagram. And this man was 28 years old, by the way. Okay, he said, "I am putting wings on pigs today. They take one of ours, let's take two of theirs." And he used the hashtag shoot the police and rip Eric Gardner and rip Mike Brown. Those were the hashtags. So again, I think it's a very difficult. It's going to be difficult to separate this from the protest and from a revenge type of thing. I think even if he weren't disturbed, it would be hard for me to say he wasn't disturbed just to be able to go up and massacre two people that you don't even know, you have no beef with. His mother, in an article I read, she found out about this because she saw his picture on a gurney, and she knew he was dead, and she had no idea that he had been the shooter, and she only found that out later. But she immediately offered her condolences to the family. She wanted to let them know that she too was grieving the loss of her son, but she was so hurt that the events that took place before his death did take place. And she said that he was disturbed, he'd had a lot of problems, and that he'd even tried to kill himself when he was 13, and he had to be institutionalized. Sorry, I get caught up on big words. But anyway, she was very sorry, and I didn't see the audio of it. I just read the transcript, and it really sounded like it was from her heart. And I can only imagine how she must feel, you know. So I encourage people, as we pray for these other two families, that we pray for her too, because we don't know her situation, and it must be devastating, especially if there was some mental illness that she was unable to help him with. Apparently they'd made some attempts to help him. She did not. She also said in this article that she didn't really realize he was in as bad shape as he was in until just before this happened, and then she got word from his child's mother, which I don't know if this is the same woman that had been shot that morning or not. I never could tie those two together, but it's a very sad situation. Now, moving forward, what steps do you take now as a law enforcement officer who knows that there's some people that are becoming very radical over these protests? What are y'all doing to protect yourself?
Well, that's a good question. There's some things that we can do, and then there's some that are beyond our control. I know that several agencies, especially in the major cities lately, have been requesting or trying to place 2 officers in every patrol vehicle as an additional safety measure. I applaud that. That's a wise thing to do when it can be done. Law enforcement nationwide, especially in Texas, is highly trained. And so, again, this is in the news, but law enforcement officers are killed, almost every other day in the United States. Right now in 2014, we're at about 123 law enforcement murders and or deaths. And so if you put that in perspective, that's almost every other day. And some of those you'll never hear about. But, one thing that we've seen, and again, this is now, but we can even go back to almost 6 months ago when the Pennsylvania state trooper was killed right outside of their police station, right outside of the barracks. And of course, a nationwide manhunt was launched for the person who had some vendetta against law enforcement and took some, hiding in the woods. And, so this happens. It happens with some regularity. So I hope that we get the opportunity to see those 2-man or 2-person units in police cars. That'll definitely help. I think that we're going to have to look at utilizing our neighboring agencies. Maybe the sheriff's department and school district police, all the other agencies that we have can start responding to certain calls. In this case, neither of those officers were on a call. They were in a car. They were training. They had no contact. This had nothing to do really with even contacting a dangerous person. They probably got up in the morning and thought it was going to be an easy day. It was a training day. They were going to be part of an exercise. And, sitting in your car, you're vulnerable anywhere. The message has already been put out in the Houston and Harris County area that, we should be extra vigilant at stop signs and red lights, that we shouldn't remain in one place for a long period of time because it gives opportunity to those folks that may want to do us harm to kind of focus in our location. So I encourage my guys to move around a lot, not sit still. When you come out of the police department, use a different door every time if you can. Those are some of the basic level steps that we do. As far we're pretty highly trained, but there is no routine in law enforcement. There is no easy day. There is no safe day. These things happen when you get home. They happen when you get to work. So it's a tough thing. I don't know that we can be any safer. It's inherently a dangerous job, and it's dangerous all the time.
Well, I understood, and maybe that they were talking about in New York specifically that they're talking about body armor, and which of course wouldn't have done any good in this particular situation. But then we've also heard St. Louis, they're talking about the body cams, and I don't know if that would reduce the threat as much. I guess if you're getting filmed shooting a cop, you're probably going to be less inclined to do that.
One thing I found out about cameras is that situations like this are probably not going to prevent someone from shooting a cop, because what happens, like this instance, most of those people are either going to commit suicide very quickly afterwards, or there's going to be a gun battle with other law enforcement afterwards. So those people, just like this person was, are bent on killing no matter what the cost. And we see that there, and we see it in school shootings. It's the same principle. Generally the school shootings happen in a very short amount of time, and once law enforcement shows up, it's either ended by the law enforcement ending the shooter's life or the shooter taking their own life. They don't care. Those people don't care if they're on camera. What camera does do is give us evidence to prosecute other crimes, and it probably deters some mischief acts, spray painting, graffiti. But somebody that's bent on murder, you really are not stopping them. The only thing that stops somebody that's bent on murdering and killing is another person with a gun, whether that is a concealed license holder, law enforcement officer, somebody that is able to take action.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay. Well, then the reactions, of course, de Blasio was trying, I don't know did you watch the press conference he did today?
I did.
Okay. Yeah. And I thought a lot of what he said was good. I don't care much for him. So, I'm always constantly trying to read through the lines, but between the lines. But One thing he did do is basically he turned it around on the press and he said, this is because they're saying, the blood's on your hands. And he's saying this is on your hands because you keep, you're making it sound like this one incident happens every single day. And I took a little issue with that because I think that's exactly what has been done with Eric Garner and Trayvon Martin. And of course, Trayvon Martin was not a police situation, but and Michael Brown. They've taken these little incidents here and there, and they try to make it sound like, well, every 5 minutes a young black man gets killed by a cop. So I felt like that was a little bit hypocritical. But he did actually ask to stop the protest, at least until these officers were laid to rest. I took issue with that too. If there's any way, even a tiny bit, tiny little way that this man was encouraged or got the power or the encouragement to do something like this based on these protests, then let's stop protesting. Let's don't do this anymore. Let's sit down and talk about this. Let's get this all out in the open instead of these protests that many of them are ending up in violence. I mean, I think it was in Brooklyn, like last week, that 2 officers were attacked during a protest. They weren't killed, but they were physically attacked. So, yeah, there's a few peaceful protests out there, but there's some really bad ones too. Have you had any problems with protesters in the Harris County area or Fort Bend?
Yes. Well, Fort Bend, not so much. Of course, we neighbor Harris County. We're our county lines meet up with each other. Fort Bend County has not seen it, but Harris County and the city of Houston has, both downtown and there was a large protest that went inside the Galleria Mall, which is one of our larger malls in downtown or near downtown Houston, where they had protesters, and it actually ended up shutting down most of the mall operations just prior to the holidays, one of their busiest times. So yes, we have seen it. As a law enforcement officer and former military soldier, I support and I defended people's right to protest. I defended their constitutional right to basically speak freely within reason, and so I fully support that. I took an oath to uphold and defend that, and I think probably every law enforcement officer and military person would agree that I have no problem with protesting. I have a problem with violent protesting, and I have a problem with people coming in from other areas during those protests and damaging, killing, burning, areas that they have no business being in, and they're not there for protests. They're there for violence and theft and mob mentality, and that's different than protesting. Now I can tell you, on each one of those cases, the legalities of all of them, and how I feel like folks probably haven't listened to the facts. There's a quote that essentially says, you can present all the facts you want, but people will still choose to believe what they want to believe, and that's what's happened in a lot of these cases. Any loss of life is tragic on some level to someone, but the fact is bad guys, when they do things like that, they are going to put themselves in a position where they're going to get hurt or killed or injured when they resist law enforcement. That's not the time and place to do it. And both the New York situation with the so-called choking incident and then the one in Ferguson, what we've seen are 2 people that have long criminal histories and that resisted arrest, and they resisted detention. And that never ends well. Violence is never a pretty thing. There's no way to sugarcoat it. There's no way to make it look good, no matter what level it's on. And unfortunately, those folks chose the route that ended up in their demise. And I wish they hadn't. And I know all the officers there wish that hadn't happened too, because it's miserable for everybody.
Okay, now I have to do this breaking news real quick, and then we'll get back to it, because I just got this sent to me. It says that the Walmart toll-free 877 phone number was hacked, and unsuspecting Granbury, Texas consumers called Walmart this evening to checked her card balance on the toll-free number, and on the back of the card only discovered that the toll-free number had been changed. The menu options had been changed, according to the recording. The savvy consumer was offered a free $100 gift card if she gave up personal information such as name, address, and phone number. She was asked a series of questions in an attempt to obtain information by the party on the other end. She hung up and she called the toll-free number again, and that was on the back of her card, and was met with the same results. And it turns out that anyone calling that 877 number for the Walmart cards are having their information compromised. So if you're calling the 877-937-4058 number, you're calling a number that's been hacked. She was asked for personal information, and immediately she hung up when she realized that this was probably a plot. So anybody, if you're calling Walmart tonight to get your account balance and it doesn't sound right, it's not. Hang up. Do not give them any information. And that just came from our newsroom, and they wanted me to get that out there real quick. So sorry to interrupt you with that. So going forward, well, let's hit a couple other things, and then we can talk about where do we go from here, because I do want to discuss the other two issues that took place, and that was, of course, and I'm trying to pull up my notes so I can get his name right. That was officer in Florida, and this officer, this was the New York situation took place at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 2 a.m. in Pinellas County, Florida. This was the community of Tarpon Springs.
Right.
And a 45-year-old officer by the name of Charlie Condek was shot and killed. And Charlie was actually the father of 6. And he was a much-loved man. And what had happened, what led up to this, is that he had responded to a noise complaint at an apartment complex. Apparently, these people had gone into this complex. They were looking specifically for somebody. The person that was identified as the shooter was 23-year-old Marco Perella, and he had previously lived in that apartment complex. He felt like somebody in that apartment complex had reported him for a violation of his probation, and so the people that witnessed the whole event said he was extremely angry. He was banging on doors because I guess he didn't know exactly which apartment the guy lived in. Their music was blaring. He had his girlfriend or woman was in the car with him. Her name was Evelyn Desiree Santiago, and when one of the neighbors asked her to turn down the music, she refused to do it, and she flipped him off. And anyway, the officer that was called, like I said, this was Charlie Condek, came out there. He realized immediately something was wrong, so he called for backup. Once he called for backup, he got out of the car to approach them, and he was immediately shot with a .40 caliber weapon, and he was able to return fire before he fell down. The suspect then got in his car, backed up, and ran over the officer that he just shot, and left him there, and he fled. Fortunately, he ran into a phone pole, and his car became inop, and he tried to flee, but the police got him and took him into custody. And I'm assuming that his friend that was in the car with him is also in custody, but I never was able to confirm that. But anyway, it was a horrible situation. He was not doing anything. The police officer was walking up to him for a noise violation, and he chose to kill him.
Right.
And not, okay, so it's not just, oh, bummer, I'm going to go back to jail because they're going to find out I violated my probation. He shot him, and then he ran over him with the car.
Right.
He said when he got to the police station he was really sorry. He didn't intend for any of this to happen. A little bit too little, too late.
Right.
I don't know that you could actually, again, I wouldn't try to link this with the protest, except for the fact that the sentiment right now is so negative on police. It's like they almost are not even realizing that police are human because you guys are being so beat up on. I mean, you're Satan to some of these guys. This guy is not going to go home. You know, he died. And also that same night, the night before, the night that the actual incident happened in Brooklyn, in the Bronx, a guy was in an apartment complex shooting at people's windows. And the police were called, and they got out, and it was 2 officers. They got out and walked up to him and asked him what he was doing, and he took the gun and he put it right into the cop's face, and he fired twice. Fortunately, he had run out of ammo at that point. And when he realized he put the weapon in his pocket, and he ran, and he was tackled by the police, and he's now in custody. This is just blatantly, there's no, what purpose would, okay, so you're out there, you make a mistake, maybe you're drunk, maybe you're high, maybe I don't know what you're doing something stupid, and you're shooting out people's windows. That's really bad, and you're probably going to get in a whole lot of trouble for it. But not enough trouble to take somebody's life and to go to hell for it. I mean, I'm sorry. What are these people thinking?
Well, I think, like we've talked before, I think we could probably go for hours on where these problems start. And I thank you for the correction about his children. He left behind those children and a wife. And, it's it always happens that way. There's never a good death. What's going through these people's minds, I think, is something that started long before the act itself was committed. And truly, that starts in the family, in the home. I don't know. I think I know most of where these people came from. And, a lot of times we see a household without a mother or a father or somebody that's been through the juvenile system or maybe foster care. And none of those are excuses. But I think that society as a whole is losing the fundamentals and morals that we were brought up on, and some people just don't get that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so what this guy, and it proves the point once again. The 2 NYPD officers were on a training exercise. This deputy was, this officer with the Tarpon Springs Police Department was responding to a noise complaint, and it sounds so simple and routine. We actually do this hundreds of times a day in large cities. Their radio's too loud, their car's too loud, people are making noise in the house and throwing a party. This is such what people would call a routine call for service. And it shows that there is no such thing as routine. There is no such thing as a safe call for law enforcement. Any situation can go bad. And typically, the worst are domestic family violence disputes. Those are very deadly for law enforcement. And then, of course, traffic stops. But even though we know those have a high probability of going bad, I've also seen officers that were shot and they were responding to a complaint of somebody stole my mail, and the officer was shot by the person calling to report their mail stolen. It just doesn't matter what the call starts out to be. When people have in their minds to kill law enforcement, they're going to do it. We've had house fires. I've seen this in both states that I've worked at, and it recently happened in Florida, where somebody had set their house on fire knowing that law enforcement and fire would respond, and they shot both the law enforcement and the firefighters that responded. It was all part of their plan. They knew exactly what they were going to do. They planned it out, and they were intent on committing murder. This person here in Florida, it sounds to me like they were agitated. I don't know what their criminal history was, if there was one.
There was.
But there was, yeah. And so, there's usually a theme here, in New York with the person that died from what we saw a couple weeks ago, had 31 criminal offenses. in Ferguson, that guy had, assaulted someone physically and was not a good person, So we tend to tell folks no one ever calls 911 to tell us everything's okay and have a nice day.
Mm-hmm.
We're always responding to someone's worst moment, and those have a tendency to go bad, and that's what happened in these cases. Unfortunately, I think it just goes back to how people were raised, the morals and ethical values that were instilled or not instilled on them from their parents and others. And, I do agree with the statement that it takes a village to raise a child. I don't necessarily care for who said it, but, it does take a mom and a dad. It takes grandparents, and it takes an extended family and neighbors to properly raise someone. We're not getting that anymore. We're so far away from that right now in the United States that we're going to keep seeing this stuff happen.
Well, it's moral relativism has just crept all through our society. So where at sometime in our history, parents figured out a way to make it work out if they were having problems in their marriage, and they figured out ways to keep a family unit together. That's not even an issue anymore. If
Right.
you don't like it, bolt is what it is. And so you have increased poverty because your families are splitting up, and what was once one is now two households. A lot of times it is the women who end up impoverished in the situation, and they're usually the ones that are the custodial parent. So that's horrible, and we see that's really statistically happening big time in the African American community, and that's horrible. But I see it. We're trying our best. All the other communities are trying their best to catch up. It is horrible, and I absolutely agree with you. That's where it starts. But I want to look at a couple of things that have been said by people that we would recognize their name. And one would be, like I said, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar wrote a piece in Time, and he said, and just part of what he said was, we need to understand that their deaths are and he's speaking of the two officers in New York, are in no way related to the massive protests against systemic abuses of the justice system as symbolized by the recent deaths, also national tragedies of Eric Garner, Aki Gurley, and Michael Brown. He speaks of the killer on Saturday, and he says he's suicidal. He wasn't an impassioned activist expressing. Told you I have a hard time with big words. It's been a long day. Political frustration. He was a troubled man who had shot his girlfriend earlier that day. He was even Instagram warnings of his violent intentions. None of this is the behavior of a sane man or a rational activist. He goes on to say that the police unions are bad. They're beating up on the mayor, and he said this phony and logically baffling indignation is similar to that expressed by the St. Louis Police Association when it demanded an apology from the NFL when several Ram players entered the field in the hands up, don't shoot. I wanted to read that and a couple of others because there is definitely a disconnect in the communities. And my point is, whether I don't necessarily feel like there's a whole lot of police abuse. I think that people that regularly get the police call on them because there's some misbehavior, which again goes back to our families are separated and these kids don't have anything else to do. I think that they tend to feel that there is police abuse because they have to deal with the police officers. I've never had to deal with it. Most of the police officers I've ever spoken with, when they were stopping me for a ticket, have been extremely nice, and I've never felt any abuse whatsoever. But the fact that they do feel abuse makes, whether it's a reality or it's perceived, it makes it a problem that we have to work on. Do you in Houston or know of any other departments that have reach out programs, that try to figure out how to work out these differences, how to come to the table, how to just sit down? Let's don't wait till everybody's holding signs and saying, what do we want? Dead cops. When do we want them? Right now? That's too late. That's too late. So what do we do? How do we go forward from here, Wayne?
Well, I think one of the main things we can do, and like you said, the majority of law enforcement, 99%, are perfectly fine. What you saw in these last few things were not criminal acts by law enforcement officers. They were folks that were involved in criminal acts, that were resisting arrest, and essentially brought this upon themselves when the whole situation could have been avoided by simply obeying the commands of law enforcement and doing what you're supposed to do. But you're right. I mean, there is some perception, and perception is reality, even if it's not factual, that there is a disconnect between some of society and law enforcement. So what we do from here, I think, both sides need to engage in a little more handshaking, coffee drinking, and donut eating together, to kind of sit down at the table and talk like people. Because, over time, I think folks maybe mistakenly believe that cops are robots and we have no emotion. And there is a certain reason why we have to act that way when we're on duty. But, we are people. We have families. We have a job to do. Other people have jobs to do. They're all just as important. I respect and have in my profession, I think it's special. But a person that's a doctor and a nurse and a teacher, they think theirs is special, and they are. We all have a place in society. I think we need to do a better job of coming together and talking and getting to know each other. Over time, when these incidents happen, they tend to separate. We talk about the thin blue line in law enforcement, and that doesn't mean we don't talk to anyone else. It means that we hold the line, but people perceive that we're not approachable. People perceive that we don't have feelings and that we can't be talked to. One thing I encourage Academy cadets to do before they hit the streets is they need to, get out and shake some people's hands. They need to say hi to them when they're in the line at McDonald's. We've kind of, in society, we've all gotten, and cops, not just cops, but we all stick to our little circles and our little cliques. And if we don't get out of those, we don't know what other people think and feel. And so that is something we have to do better. In Texas, we have most of our legislative requirements revolve around racial profiling and discrimination issues. So again, we're highly trained on those subjects, and none of what just happened recently had anything to do with racial profiling or any of those things either. But as far as our training goes, we have some of the most intense training on those subject matters. And so I don't think training is an issue. I think talking is an issue. We need to do a better job of communicating. We need to do a better job of trying to understand each other, and that's going to help a bunch. Some of your larger agencies do things like citizen police academies, and I really encourage folks to go through those, because if you want to know firsthand what a police officer or deputy sheriff goes through on a daily basis, go to a citizens police academy, sign up. You'll get a little taste of that. And a lot of times folks go into those things, and when they come out, things connect. It makes sense to them. I don't expect people to understand my job. I do the job so that other folks don't have to. I just like I wouldn't expect to know what a neurosurgeon does in his job. And so when people don't understand our job and they don't understand the legal system and the laws, they are easily misled by false information, whether it's from the Jesse Jacksons or Al Sharptons. If you study the law and you have that background, then you'll understand that none of these cases recently had anything to do with a violation of law by cops or racial profiling or any one of those things.
Well, I agree with that. There was a article that was, and I believe it was in a CNN article, where a woman who was in Brooklyn. I think she's a vendor like on the street out there, sells flowers or something. But she was asked, and I'm looking for her name in my massive amount of notes, but she was asked about it, and she said, well, I mean, it's sad, but I think now it'll make officers think twice before they just, irresponsibly shoot black men for no reason. So again, there's perception. It's being propped up, and it's being propped up in a lot of different ways. There was a CNN Sally Kahn. She did a little piece not too long ago after the Ferguson situation. I believe it was in November is when she did it, and she said, let's give you a couple of her quotes. Black communities are ultimately protesting systems of injustice and inequality that structurally help white people with systematically harming black people. Just because you're white and therefore generally benefit from those systems doesn't mean you inherently support those systems or need to defend them. Benefiting from white privilege, let me say it again, benefiting from white privilege is automatic. Defending white privilege is a choice. Privilege is like oxygen. You don't realize it's there till it's gone. As white folks, we can't know what it's like to go through without racial privilege because we literally have never done it before. You have heard stories about black friends being monitored in department stores, or even seen the research that black names on resumes get half as many job interviews as white names on resumes. Maybe you know that black man or boy, or maybe you didn't know that a black man or boy is killed every 28 hours in America by a police officer or vigilante. Maybe you should read the studies on implicit shooter bias, how we're all more likely to pull a simulated trigger on an unarmed black man than an unarmed white man. Maybe you know that even the most egalitarian Americans harbor unconscious negative attitudes about black people. But still, in some part of your brain, if you imagine that that wouldn't happen to you, even if you are black, it means you believe something other than race is to blame for all those statistics and studies, which can only boil down to some rationalization or inherent superiority on your part. She is basically saying that the same thing that came out in that training program, that military training program last year in Florida. There is white privilege, but white people don't know it, and it is the responsibility of other races to make sure that we do understand that there is white privilege. So, having said that, that is propaganda, and that propaganda is being offered up because of the protest and because of the incidents in Ferguson. So it relates right back to police officers and their white privilege. How do you see? That's what I stay up nights thinking about this because I'm very concerned about race relations in this country. God's really laid that on my heart. But to see propaganda like that, to try to convince people that they're bad because of their skin color, and you don't even know it, so you just need to accept it, it's so counterproductive.
Right, yeah, absolutely, and it sounds like that lady is very misinformed to me. I think our country now, certainly there are racist people on both sides of the fence. So, but as a whole, I think we pretty much did away with most of that a long time ago. I truly don't believe that law enforcement officers are racist or white people are any more racist than black. I think there's equal wrong there. But what I can tell you is this. We've had some very educated black men, and they've definitely, to say that there is some racism or something that keeps them from reaching the top is an absolute fallacy. Number one, we have the first black president in the United States. We have folks like Allen West, who I would assume and hope that will be a future, somewhere in our future government. And he is a black man, highly awarded military veteran, former.
Wonderful.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. We have folks like Dr. Again, who is a black man who has succeeded. We had Herman Cain, who was a presidential candidate and who had come from nothing and started at the very bottom at 2 different restaurant chains and worked his way up to the very top and was a presidential candidate. We had General Colin Powell, who was the Secretary of State, some of the highest levels of government. We've got females in those positions. We've got males. We've got whites, blacks, you name it, and everywhere in between. So if you're trying to tell me that there's a group that has less of a chance than other groups right now, it is absolutely a misstatement, and it's propaganda, like you said, and that is a type of lies and deceit that are going to cause these problems to continue. You have folks like Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton who are essentially paid. They earn their paycheck to keep these protests and to represent these families and to expel the absolute hate and racism, because they are, in my opinion, that keeps these issues going on and on and on. And what happens is people are presented with misinformation. They don't check it out themselves, and regardless of when the facts are presented, people will choose to believe the lie that they want to believe. What most conveniently fits in their little box is what they're going to go for. Shame on that lady for doing that, especially when we have many great black men in the United States of America at all levels of the government and military, and some that I believe we'll see as president and vice president in the future. There is equal opportunity for everyone. I don't care where you start. It's not where you start your story. It's where you finish your story, and everybody has that opportunity right now in the United States.
Well, there's an attempt to divide people in this country right now. And these, I don't know if we've discussed this, but these protests that are taking place, they're the money that's organized, the organizers, the money that's coming in for those protests is not coming in from this country.
Right.
There's people that want this division, and they're working very, very diligently to continue to prop it up. And what's sad is there are a lot of people, white and black, and of all ethnicities out there, that are being used as pawns to accomplish something that they don't even have any idea what's going on. So that makes it very sad to me. I will say on a positive note, that the let's see, what's his name? The Giants coach, Tom. I'm not a Giants fan, but Tom Coughlin, I guess, wore a peace sign to honor the officers at the Giants-Rams game, and there was a Jets player, New York Jets player, and I had not heard of him. Again, I'm not a big Jets fan either, but his name is Nick Mangold, and on Sunday he wore, when he ran out on the field, he wore a NYPD hat instead of his helmet, and I think they're trying to neutralize some of the damage that was done when the Rams players ran out and did the now defunct, and everybody still knows it, hands up, don't shoot symbol, right, which is again, and I'm trying to go positive, and here I keep going back negative, but that was done on the floor of the House. There was 5 CNN anchors that did it, I think last week, that came out. It's stupid. It's a false narrative, but they're still continuing to do it. There's only one reason that they would continue to do it once they know it's been proven wrong, and that's to continue this division. And I just think a lot of people are being used, and they don't know where this thing ends up, and they're going to get blindsided, because this can't continue. So you tell me, as an officer, what can people in the community do to try to heal some of these wounds? I mean, what can we do? Look, I've never been black, and I've never been a police officer, so I don't understand the struggle, but I want to. I want to understand your point, and I want to understand an African-American person that has a beef. I want to understand their point. I want to understand both points. There's got to be some mediation here.
Right. Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, there is a middle ground, and it's going to take both I'll say sides. It's not really like someone's picking a side, but it's going to take both groups to talk to one another on an intelligent level with fact-based information to come to these conclusions on what's best for their communities. And, what's best for one community may not be exactly the same for others. I encourage people to get involved with local city government, city council meetings. Go to your police departments on their open house nights. Enroll in a Citizens Police Academy. Most agencies will even allow you, if you're an adult over 18 and you sign a little waiver, most of them will even let you ride with the cops for a shift. Just a couple times of doing that is really going to, I think, open up some dialogue. Most people's contacts with law enforcement are positive, just like you had mentioned. I do this many times a day and everything goes just fine. Traffic stops, tickets, warnings, arrests, and mutual respect from both sides goes a long way. If you treat me right, I treat you right. If you give me a reason to feel like I have something to fear, or you're going to resist, or up the ante a little bit, then that becomes a different story. Police officers are not monsters. They are highly trained here in the United States. They're highly monitored. There's a system of checks and balances, and as a whole, cops want to do what everyone else does, which is to go do their job, receive pay for doing that job, and go home to their families and see the softball games and go to the dance recitals. And if everyone understands that, I think we can all get along just fine. Mm-hmm. I think that if we all understand that we have a common interest, and that's to go home at the end of the day and everyone live peacefully, wouldn't that be a great thing?
Awesome.
I think we've run into a time where, Calvin Coolidge said that he sometimes wishes that people would put a little more emphasis on observing the law rather than they do upon its enforcement. Could you imagine if everybody just obeyed the law? How simple would this be? Would we even have this conversation? Would any of this even happen? If you drive the speed limit, if you don't, get intoxicated in public, if you don't break the law, if you don't sell cigarettes that are illegal, if you take care of your business, we would never have any of these conversations. If you obey law enforcement commands and don't resist arrest, everything's going to end up fine. You'll have your day in court. Nobody will get hurt. And if the officer was wrong, then you go through the court process and deal with it that way. Mm-hmm. But people are more worried on how the law is enforced rather than obeying the law.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And you guys have such a tough job. And I want you to know that we appreciate you. I certainly do. And I need to call the community that I live in. I need to call that police department and just let them know that I want to reach out to them, that I support them. You guys, I know you put your lives on the line every day. We appreciate you. We appreciate your families that have to take that chance every day. We have 2 minutes left, probably a minute and a half left. Real quick, let's talk about your future and your website so we can get you plugged again tonight.
Sure. Oh, well, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm running for a constable of Precinct 3 in Fort Bend County, which is one of the fastest growing counties in Texas. My website is www.votewayne.thompson.com. I also have Facebook and Twitter. I'm running for 2016 to take office in 2017. I'm fortunate because of radio shows like you that I've done 7 nationally, essentially broadcast radio shows, both live and via streaming radio, and I will be on the cable news network here most likely tomorrow, and I'm just blessed for that. My goal is one of my primary platforms is to restore the relations with the community that police had almost 20 years ago. We remember the Norman Rockwell painting of the officer having ice cream with the kid on the bar stool there at the ice cream shop. I want to see those days again. I'm a firefighter and paramedic too, and I tell people it's just easier to tell folks I'm a fireman. Because when you say you're a policeman, then you've got to start answering questions and you have to start defending yourself. I don't want to see that anymore. The community is the police, and the police are the community. It's not 2 separate entities. that goes back to the very beginning of law enforcement policing when Sir Robert Peel, who is considered one of the modern day law enforcement founders, said that it's the same. The police are the community, and the community are the police. We are not two separate entities. We serve the public. We work together. They're our eyes and ears, and we come do the dirty work when we have to. But
hey, we're done. Well, I'm sorry, we're out of time. We're out of time. I want to have you back. We've got like 1 second left. So thank you so much for being with us tonight. And I didn't get your website out there, but I will get it out there. And I appreciate you taking the time tonight. Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.